Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamu alaikum. This is Rabi Mahmood and welcome back to lecture number 11. Today in our lecture we are going to discuss the English language in the Middle English period. This is basically an introductory kind of lecture. I'll be giving you an overview of all the developments, of all the rise, of all the events that were very prominent in Middle English period, because this is really a remarkable period in the history of English language. We'll be looking, firstly I'll be giving you just an overview, and then we are going to look into all those points in very detail in the later part of our lecture. Let's start with an overview. Before this perhaps you would have heard that modern English period is divided into two main periods. One was early modern English period and the other was late modern English period. In the same tradition, some scholars, some linguists and a few renowned people, they have also divided Middle English period into two phases. The first one is early modern English and the second is later modern English. In this overview, I will not be dealing with the events, I will not be dealing with the socio-cultural and the political events that were going on at that time. Rather, I'll be just focusing and I'll be giving you a few fingertips about the Middle English language. That what kind of English language was present at the time, what were its features. We are just going to have a look firstly at the brief points, then we'll be discussing it in detail in the later part of our lecture. Yes, early modern English period, some scholars say that it starts from 1100 and it ranges towards 1300. It's a radically simplified English that was found in that era. As we are talking about history of language, you would have seen that in a previous lecture different changes are taking place in the Old English. And now while we are moving ahead, we are coming towards the Middle English period, we are looking that, we are realizing, we are coming to the fact that English language is radically simplified English language that is found, that was found in this era. It losing most of its inflectional endings, but as yet keeping a mostly Germanic vocabulary. As you know, and we have discussed earlier as well, that English is a descendant of Germanic branch of language. If it is a descendant of Germanic branch, so it means that it would be having at least a bit of vocabulary, a bit of the sounds that would be same like that of Germanic branch. So what we are finding in this Middle English period, we are saying that English is there, it does not have inflections, it is rather it has the vocabulary that is Germanic vocabulary right now. It retains many different dialectal forms and has little standardization in spelling and other orthography. Definitely you see that it's a period of progress. It is marking the development and the rise. And how it is marking? It retains many different dialectal forms. Many different dialectal forms were there. The English was being spoken before this in different regions. So we have got different regional varieties that were persistent, that were present in Middle English period. And we have not only the dialectal, not only the regional varieties of English language were present, rather what was happening, they were having they were coming towards the standardization of language as well in this modern English period. And while they were coming towards standardization, what were the two main things that were kept in mind? The first one was spelling and the other was orthography. Then a few reforms were made, and then we come towards later Middle English period. Scholars have divided it into 1300 to 1450, and they say that it is heavily influenced by the French vocabulary and has two major literary dialects. Coming from a lot of dialects from the era of where many dialects were present, and perhaps they were coming towards the standardization as well. Now in this late Middle English period, what is going on? They are influenced by the French vocabulary and has two major literary dialects. There were the two major literary dialects that were present. One was Midlands, you know, where somewhat towards the standard pronunciation was spoken, and Midland or Northern and London dialect. London dialect was at this time, it was at peak, it was acceptable. Particularly in the London dialect, we began to see standardization under the influence of chancery clerks. There was one main thing, one main feature of Middle English period that we have realized here is that Middle English period was a period of standardization of English. Out of the different dialects of English, we are coming towards standardization, and standardization was done in their spellings and their orthography. Middle English period, it started from 1066. You know that we have already discussed a bit of it. It means because we started our previous lecture from 991, and we have discussed that lecture or up till 14th, 13th and 14th century, a bit of that. So a bit of recapitulation and a few more things that were not there from the perspective of language. Yes, Middle English period, it is spreaded according to different people from 1066 to 1500, and it is said that there were many more texts than the Old English period that were introduced in this era. No standard variety of English has been up till now evidenced, and then there were certain important dates that are important in this period. For example, in 1066 Norman conquest, we know the background, that how did it started, and 1100 it was a round number, and we'll see that how 1100 has marked a few of the changes in English. Then 1476, a very, very important time, a very important year, because first printing press was introduced in England, and that was known as Caxton. We are going to have a detailed study of Caxton as well. And then 1485, at the accession of Henry VII, that was of Tudor. We have looked at Henry, at the history till Henry III, and it is gone far away, and we'll be looking and discovering Henry VII as well. There are some other points, that there were some Germanic highly inflected words were there, as well as some hybrid words, means many loan words, and they were lightly inflected words were there in the language, because I'm saying that today we are going to study Middle English period from the perspective of English language. The focus is on more in language rather than on the rest of the invasions that we have already covered. Yes, let's look at the late 14th century and look at a few lines that I am going to read. These are actually the lines that were written by Chaucer, and this is Reeve's Tale. Chaucer is said to be a very fine poet. He was a poet actually of all the English period, or as well as the early Middle English period. He has written a very different kind of language. He introduced many vocabulary items, and see, let's go through these lines, and then we'll see that what is this. He writes in Reeve's Tale that, "How fair thy fair daughter and thy wife, and John also, how now, what do ye here?" Look at the words that are distinct, that are not there. We were looking at Chaucer's lines, "How fair thy fair daughter and thy wife, and John also, how now, what do ye here?" I'm going to point out a few words, and then you're going to ponder and think about those words, that whether are they really from the same English that we have yet, or are they from like they look like Middle English period or thing like that. How fair thy wife, thy fair daughter, and thy wife. How now, what do ye hear? These are a few expressions that we have pointed out, and I would say that these are the expression of the Middle English period, very, very dominant. We find so many instances in Shakespeare as well. He has written and used these words in his dramas very extensively, and we find a lot of examples. Let's look another example that is preface to Genesis, and it was written late into the 10th century with some modernized characters. The Wendy he ongien to them kynage God gesukep as twe iken and twe keren. Also literally familiarity, Chaucer Christmas carols, folk songs, 30 days hath September. Can you understand any of the words that are written in these lines? No, perhaps, because they are more older one. They were written in the late 10th century, and the words that were written in the late 14th century, we have seen a transition in these words. We have noticed the difference in these two. Yes, also literary familiarity, Chaucer Christmas carols we would found in some other things as well. But let's see, Old English text copies in Middle English period. Yes, not everything was introduced newly in Middle English period. They were adapted, they were the same, yet they had been changed. For example, Old English text copied in Middle English period were from different domains. They were copied. The first one was law, Anglo-Saxon chronicles, homilies, psalters, medicinal and text. These are some of the things that have already been copied from the Middle English. Some Middle English carols are this thing. Just for example, we look at this side that is a bit more readable perhaps. Look at the first line that is written, and it means spring has come in. Loudly sing cuckoo, seed grows and meadow blooms, and the forest springs up now, sing cuckoo. Eve bleats after lamb, cow lows after calf, bullocks the buck farts, merrily sing cuckoo, cuckoo, cuckoo. You sing well, cuckoo, nor cease, you never know. Sing cuckoo now, sing cuckoo, sing cuckoo now, sing cuckoo. So this is you can see a very, very good comparison in the Old English as well as in the Middle English. The Middle English is far more better. We call it better in the sense because we find it more readable. We find it more comprehensible, and we find it more understandable because of this thing. Why were Old English texts updated? There is perhaps the first one is that there is antiquarian interest in this. That's why they were updated. Or as well as religious texts of the particular use of sermons, devotional readings. Yes, a very important aspect. They were updated. They were promoted to the Middle English period. Why? Because they were the religious texts. And we cannot deny, we cannot leave the religious texts as ones. For example, look at our own religious text, that is Arabic. Arabic is the language of our Holy Quran. You know, in Holy Quran, the Arabic that is there perhaps is quite different from the Arabic that the Arabs speak now, and from the Arabic that the Arabs have spoken in the olden times. See that how the things are changing, but still we have been accepting, and it is a religious belief that that the language of Holy Quran, it is accepted in the same way as it was revealed to the Holy Prophet. We are accepting, and we are taking it up till now, and we'll continue to take it in our rest of the life. Same was the case with the perhaps English, that when it was the language of the sermons, and there were some fixed things, and there were some devotional readings, it continued to update. They continue to update it, and they continue to preserve it for the upcoming generations. There was an ongoing oral tradition between Old English and Middle English formula, and this was aphorism. Oral traditions mean actually the main trait of oral tradition is that the focus is more on the oral, or more on orality. People believe more in speech rather than the writing. So there was an ongoing oral tradition between Old English and Middle English formula, and people kept believing in the orality rather than the written things, because orality was perhaps more easy, and that was because of this thing it started getting updated. People started passing it from one generation to another, but still perhaps later on it became extincted, later on it became totally changed, perhaps because people stopped speaking, and it was not found in the written record. It was just found in the orality. But didn't English die? Political dominance usually accompanied by linguistic dominance. Yes, we are saying we are looking at the language perspective. We are focusing and concentrating more on English language, and we are saying that how political dominance usually accompanied by the linguistic dominance. Yes, overall the political phenomena that was going on at the time, the political dominance usually accompanied, it was simultaneously going on alongside the lines of linguistic dominance, with the language dominance. Okay, the politics is, I would say, what is my view about politics? Politics, I would say, it's a manipulation of language. It's a use of the words. It's a use of the words. The language comes in the politics. People maneuver the language. People actually they play with the language, and they convince the people to vote to them. This is what politics actually is. It's actually the main business is concerned with the language. Language is the main focus in the politics. And then we say, okay, we are talking actually that why English did not die at that time, because political dominance that was coming on, people were becoming dominant. It was coming with the linguistic dominance, and the linguistic dominance is concerned with the language, while language is concerned with the politics. One party that was more politically powerful, and that was not only powerful in the sense of the politics, but also that was powerful in the sense of the language. The language that they had was a language of dominance. The language that they had was a language of power at that time, and they really perhaps because of this language did not die and did not change with the passage of time. By Chaucer's die, French was foreign again, and by 1076 English rebellion crushed. It was totally crushed at that time. French, the language of power, barons, bishops, abbots. We have already discussed all these details, that how French has once become a language of everything. Then we have also looked at the aspects of Anglo-Norman French. That was a joint venture of the Normans who were basically French in their ethnic background. Kings spent a lot of time in France. Yes, we have also seen that although they were the kings of England, but still they used to spend a lot of time in France as well, because the both of these nations, not only geographically but also politically, they were working in collaboration. The king of England was the king of France as well at one part of the time. Richard I He actually had been there for 6 months in the England, and William could not learn English. Richard went there and he had lived there in the English, whereas William could not learn English over there. And the reasons these were the certain reasons that are found. Extensive written literature, strong oral tradition was there. English is not dying because of all these things. Because people started passing it on. Although French was too much in interaction, yet there was a time when English existed and it continued. It actually became more powerful than Latin and other language. Extensive written literature, and yes, we are now talking about the reasons of its that why English did not die. The reason is that extensive written literature was there. It was written in English again, and strong oral tradition was there. People started passing it on orally from one generation to the other generation. There were vibrant vernacular religious traditions were also there. And then Anglo-Saxon texts in 11th century, and we see some manuscripts of the Beowulf. Beowulf is supposed to be, is said to be rather the oldest English epic. It's actually an English epic that is about the war and the warriors. It was written a poem. It is a kind of poem, epic. That is a kind of poem, and it was written in a very Middle English period in the 11th century. Yes, there are certain other reasons as well. There was political uncertainty that was going on, and it continuing from French or English strife, brutal consumption, brutal occupation in 11th century, and 100 Years' War that we have talked about, 1337 to 1453. It continued. French, the language of the enemy, was there. Yes, political uncertainty, definitely. When the wars are going on, when the attacks are going on, when there are some invasions on the country, then what is the result? The result is the political uncertainty. The kings were changing. One king was invading the other, and it all caused political uncertainty. And not only the uncertainty on the level of kingship, but also uncertainty continued from the French and English strife. And there was a brutal occupation in 11th century, and what was that? A very, very brutal thing that had happened again, 100 Years' War. It was actually a strife. It was actually a continuous struggle that was going on between the French and the English. And French was actually the language of enemy. Then it was concerned, because then they turned to be enemies rather than the friends. The two nations that used to be under one domain, under the reign of one king, they turned into two different enemies. Not enough Normans in England were there, from 10 to 15,000 to 1.5 millions, 3 millions by 1300. Almost by 1300 there were hardly 1300 Normans that were left, that were there, and the rest of the people had already gone. Most had no contact with the French, and if they were there, they as we have said, they started considering themselves as Englishers. They started recognizing themselves as English. So if they were there, they had no contact with the French people. Bilingual class. Yes, because of the bilingual class, again English could survive. Bilingual class of what? Aristocracy, senior clergy and merchants. Yes. Yes, there was a bilingual class. Bilingual class, as I already told you, this is the class of the people who are proficient and who can speak the two languages. there was a bilingual class of the aristocracy, of one aristocrats, and then senior aristocrats are the noble at the upper class of the society, then senior clergy, again the administration, the leaders or the bishops or the archbishops, then the merchants who were the traders. It was a language of that class as well. Then small pressure to learn English, baronial staff and clergy, although there was not that much pressure to learn English, but still it continued, and that people started learning it, and it did not faded. Few French women came to England, lots of intermarriages, bilingual kids. Yes, as France and England have been in very much close connections, what happened as a result of this close connection? The French, a few of the French women, they migrated to England. They came there, they got married with the Britishers, with the Englishers, and because of these marriages, what was the result of these marriages? The bilingual kids, the kids who were both proficient not only in French but also in English. They had the taste of both the languages. So the two languages coexisted, and they kept developing. They did not vanish, they did not die. Lots written in Latin restricted sphere of the French. Yes, there again, French was again, we cannot say was a completely fully powerful language at that time. Rather, we can say that yes, there were lot of written, that was things were written in Latin, but it was a restricted sphere of French. Restricted sphere of the French mean it was a confined area where the French could not enter. It was a specific area, it was specifically made that French could not could not cross that limit. French word used in the formal domains, for example law, literature, arts, but never the sole official language. Yes, another thing, another reason that why English survived at that time. Although there was so much French was spoken, we are saying it was spoken, it was the language of churches, it was the language of academia, it was the language of politics, of many domains. But what happened actually? It was never ever used in the formal domains. Sometimes it was used, but it was never declared as a sole official language. It was never declared. Sole official language, this word is important here. Sole official language. Why and how this word is important? Because this was not one language that was existing at that time. We are saying that there was Latin, there was English, there was French, but it did not mean that English is going to vanish away somewhere, Latin is going to vanish away somewhere, and the French was there just. No, this was not the case. French was there and it was accepted, it was spoken. English was there, it was accepted, it was spoken, and Latin again was there, it was accepted and spoken. But again they have their own limitations in their own areas, in their own specified areas, where they in regions where they were spoken. As a very one thing that let all these languages flourished was that none of these languages was declared to be the sole official language of England at that time. Role of English sharply defined. Look, as I just told you that the roles of the languages were already defined. Let's see that what was the role of English that was already defined. It was second class in speech and rare in writing. A very important point. It was second class in speech. First class was French, being the language of academia and church. It comes on the second level in the speech and rare in writing because firstly comes Latin, then came the French, and then perhaps come the English. This was the status that was prevalent at that time. Triglossia. Triglossia is the low status. Actually, the first one is the low status, and the second competing high status languages. And diglossia refers to monoglossia. Monoglossia is a single word, dialect. Yes, there was actually a kind of triglossia that was going on. Triglossia where actually, firstly, let me tell you about one term. One term is diglossic. Yes, diglossia. Diglossia is a situation where the two varieties of a languages coexist. I'm repeating it. Diglossia is a kind of situation where two varieties of one language coexist. One is the low variety and the other is high variety. That situation would be known as diglossic situation. One language is existing. A good example, one of the good example is that of Arab country, Saudi Arab. Let's look at the example of Saudi Arab. Within Saudi Arab, the language that is spoken is Arabic. It's Arabic language. Yes, Arabic language. Arabic is also the language of Holy Quran. Yes, it is. Arabic is the language that is in which many of the books have been written. As we have in our country, MA in Arabic, BA in Arabic, we have been reading Arabic literature, Arabic things. Yes, that is there. The third is, it is also spoken by the people. Yes, it is spoken by the people. That is Arabic. So, within one country, within one state, the three different, one language is there with the three different statuses. The first status, that is, let's say, of Holy Quran, is very, very high status. We say that is a high quality of the language, of Arabic language in Saudi Arabia. The second, the lowest quality or the low quality is the language of everyday use. That Arabs use Arabic to speak, to communicate their daily things. So, in Saudi Arab, the two varieties of languages are coexisting. They are existing at the same time, at the same point of time. That is, this situation is known as diglossic situation. And there was triglossia that was existing at that time in England. There was one low status and the two competing high status languages. Yes, then there are some examples are given. You don't need to perhaps go into that much detail. Just a triglossia was going on in England. This is very interesting thing. Triglossia mein one language, we are talking about that one language that is very perhaps having some low status, and the two were having competing high statuses, although they are not, as perhaps they are the descendant of the same language, Proto-Indo-European languages. So from the Germanic language, so we say that they are having the two were enjoying, the Latin and French were enjoying perhaps the high status, competing high status, and the second was of low status, that was of English. By 1200, Nobel children speak English and learn French. A great transition in the history. By 1200, Nobel children speak English. They used to speak up English in 1200, whereas they used to learn French as well. But by 1350, still very little English writing was done, a very little. Again, we are saying that as these were the oral cultures, as there were oral traditions were going on, so a very little emphasis was given to the writing. The impact of French. Let's see that how the impact of French was there in Middle English period as well. English had to adapt new functions. No suitable English for many domains. Yes, a very exact and correct fact. Actually, it's a fact that English was there, but perhaps it was not that much developed a language that could fulfill the functions of many domains of the life. That's why English had to adapt to the new functions. No suitable English for many domains was present, and old English, now archaic. Now within Middle English period, this was another problem, that although old English was there, but still it started getting archaic, it started getting old, it started getting lost somewhere. Law, architecture, state management, music, literature, specialized vocabulary was needed in different things. You know that language is a thing that is that can be used everywhere. That is a very, very integral part of life. I would say if there is life, there is language. If there is no language, there is no life, perhaps. Yes, that is true. When we say that it's life, it means that it has got its interference in each and every sphere of life. From law, architecture, state management, music and literature, English needed actually some specialized vocabulary. Although we are saying that up till now in the old English there were many, many loans, the borrowed words from the other languages that were present. They were not individual, they were but clustered. They were individual loans were not there, they were clustered with some other words as well. So new words change pronunciation, they need some pronunciation that could change, new words to change pronunciation as well. They were needed, some new spellings were needed, some foreign compounds, idioms and formulas although were there, but still they needed something new as well. Expansion of written English from memory to the written record. Let's see that how English expanded from, it was just from what was the overall journey of English from oracy to literacy. It is from orality, it started from orality, from the spoken things to the writing things. There were many new churches, more scriptoria, more scribes and more MSS were there. There were new monastic rules and guidelines that were presented. Now in the previous slide we have discussed that what were the things and what were the domains where new English was needed. Then we came to know that there were English was needed in almost many amendments were needed, many things were needed in almost every sphere of life. New monastic rules were there, some guidelines came, more preaching, pastoral work was English needed, they needed English in that. Some writs and charters, maybe they also needed English. 2000 in Old English period, hundreds of thousands in Middle English period. They really have increased a lot from Old English to the Middle English period. There were records of apprenticeship, guild membership, military conscription, court records, parish registers, manorial records, tax records, accounts of royal income, mostly Latin but soon in English. They were needed to be in English as soon as possible, because now it was a time when English was growing and expanding and becoming the language of every domain of life. 12th century Renaissance. We have before this talked a little about 13th century and 14th century, but let me tell you that 12th century was also very important in it, and 12th century. Renaissance means, perhaps this is a new word for you. Renaissance is a complete period of history of languages, history of the world. Renaissance is very, very important period. Renaissance means rebirth, means renew. It is about the renewal of the things, where the things were refreshed. They started getting flourished. It was a time that is said that Renaissance was a time of not only of English language, not only of English literature, but also of the England itself. When it flourished, it prospered, it was at its height. While we talk about literature, there came enormous and the greatest, the dramatist of the world, who was Shakespeare, was of this age. Marlowe was of this age. When we talk about some other things, it was an age of flourishment. Shakespeare was there writing dramas, talking about the overall England and different things, and this was a period, this is known as a period of Renaissance. New language in theology, philosophy, logic, law, cosmology, medicine and mathematics. Yes, these are the subfields where the language was being introduced. See that it was firstly introduced in theology. Theology is a study of religious studies, where we talk about religions. In philosophy, it was there. Then in logic, it was introduced. In law, in churches, in cosmology, in medicine, in mathematics. Now you are seeing that how in every field language, English language started flourishing. It started getting refreshed and the renewal was there. Renewal of the interest in the classic was back. And the classics had the three languages. It was Latin, Arabic and Greek. It was renewal. Sometimes we're saying renewal, something that we are refreshing. We are going back as well to have an inheritance with us, to have our descendants with us. So there were many translations that started being made into English. English as a secular music or the literature. Poet musicians were there, and poet musicians influenced by the continental traditions at that time. In 12th century Renaissance, from Anglo-Normans to French. Let's see that how the things changed from Anglo-Normans, the people who invaded, and how they moved from Normans to the French. In 13th century, French is an international language of the culture, fashion, but Parisian French learned as a foreign language. Yes, we have talked a little bit about this earlier as well. That's why I'll be skipping it. French replaced Latin in administrative settings, court, parliament, business. It persisted into 15th century. Latin was there, French was there, English was there, but all of them, it was a triglossic situations where the different varieties of the same language were coexisting at the same time, and French being more powerful and the language of administration as well. This was a general more about Middle English period, just introduction, a bit of recapitulation as well as a few of the addition of new things. Now let's look into detail the Middle English period as well as the orthography and morphology of Middle English period. I hope that you are very, very clear about these two concepts. Orthography. The word orthography, it refers to what? It's the writing styles. Orthography is about writing style. Okay. What is morphology? Morphology is more about words and words formation. Yes, we are going to look into these two aspects in detail right now, because these two are the aspects of a language that is the base. The words make up the base. The styles, the way you form the words, the way you write it down, it forms the basis of any language, because we are now concentrating more on the individual element, whereas in our upcoming lecture we'll be focusing more on the syntax and the grammar and the meanings of the Middle English. Yes, the differences between Old and Middle English. Let's trace a few of the differences if there were any. Old English had a very limited foreign element, some Latin, Scandinavian, French and Celtic loans, important but not numerous. Yes, Old English was an English of different loans. We have talked that up till now, as if it seems as if English is just a borrowed language. It does not have anything of its own. It has borrowed different words from Latin, Scandinavian, French and Celtic and etc. Middle English vocabulary owes a huge debt to other languages, especially French, Latin and Old Norse present in the Old English, but many Old Norse words were not written down much until after the conquest. Yes, before this Old English had a combination, had the loan words, but they were not that much enormous, because after this, after the Normans conquest, when the two nations came to live quite close to each other, at that time they realized that yes, they started interacting with each other and there was a good interaction, and then at that time they got to know that French, Latin and the Old Norse, these were the different languages that have made a great impact in this Middle English. It is not only an impact, rather it's a contribution that they have made to the development of modern English. The second is that in Old English, West Saxon dialect was a standard literary dialect. Literary of literature of any specific language. In the West Saxon dialect was a standard literary dialect, and largely thanks to the King Alfred and his encouragement of the learning. Other dialects were largely colloquial. Yes, this is a new term. Colloquial, this word refers to, it is used to refer to everyday language. Actually, there are the two things, the two varieties of a language really matter. The one is that exist in one society. One is the literary variety of the language, that is literature, academia, that is quite a very high variety of any language, whereas the second variety that exists is that of colloquial variety. Colloquial, the language that is used for everyday conversation, it is quite informal, and that is more formal one. And so for formal things, the dialect that was the standard dialect was West Saxon's dialect, and it was made just because of the encouragement and the efforts of the King Alfred, who was a very, very famous king of his time. In Middle English, all dialects were used for the literary purposes. Only late in the period does the London dialect emerge. Yes, it's a great difference. On Old English, only one dialect was used for the purposes of literary things, for literary purposes, whereas on colloquial, the rest of all the dialects is the regional variety. All the other regional varieties of the language, they were used as an everyday communication. Whereas in Middle English, it was used for all the dialects, not a single one, rather all the dialects were used for literary purposes. And only late in that period does the London dialect emerge. We see that it was very, very late that London dialect started emerging. Yes, differences between Old and Middle English. The third difference would be a major sound change was there. Vowels in an unaccented syllables changed to a. Yes, this is another interesting change. The sound that is written here, this is a. This is a very, we can say this is the lightest sound in English language, and this is pronounced as, the name of the sound is schwa sound. This is schwa, a very slightly and lightly pronounced. This is a. For example, and the examples are given, and then I'll make you understand. In Old English, it was as stonas, okay, stonas, whereas in Middle English it becomes stones. So look at the sounds that are given in the Old English period. It's a s, t, o, n, o, sa. What does it make? Stones. Whereas in Middle English period, it became s, t, o, sto, n, stone, stones. It became stones. By late Middle English period, the last s sound, it became z. That is, as in modern English period, it is known as stones. Z sound. We pronounce it as stones these days. Whereas in Old English period, it was stonos. In Middle English period, it was stone, stonus, stone, as a sound. A little was there, vowel was there, a schwa vowel was there, and then the s was pronounced stonus. Whereas in the late Middle English period, it became stones. It's not the sound and s sound, both were replaced with the z. It's about the modern English period. Z, stonus in the Middle English. Middle English orthography. Two main things to remember about this orthography are that this was the age of manuscripts, not printed books. Spelling systems was much more variable. Yes, it was an age of manuscripts. People used to handwrite the things rather than the printed books that we have with the typewriter or that we have with the computerized technology. No, these things were the different. They were written with the that was the age of manuscripts, that they were not printed books were there. Spelling system was much more variable at that age. And then the second things to remember in Middle English orthography is that there were cultural domination of the Normans. Scribes dominated the making of English, and then encountered middle standard English, and that is encountered and established alphabet in a system of spelling conventions. Yes, there were Normans who were very much in, you can say they were in power, and because of their power, what happened, they developed a spelling and the convention system later on. Big problems there were many problems with the Old English period, and this was not adequate to express all the sounds required of it. Many symbols represented two or more sounds. In the Old English, for example, sir was presented as sir and k. Normans were outsider to the languages, brought a fresh perspective. They easily fixed them by replacing certain symbols by others that they were more familiar with. Yes, what happened? They replaced many of the symbols of the language with which they were already familiar, rather than the unfamiliar symbols and the signs. They used some familiar symbols. Sometimes even if the Old English symbol was clear and unambiguous, Normans replaced it with a more familiar symbol. Yes, even sometimes, even if this happened, that the Old English symbol was clear and it was unambiguous, although it used to be clear, but still it was not that much clear. Normans replaced it with a familiar symbol. They even then replaced it with their own symbol because they were more familiar with that. They were concerned with the more familiarity rather than the clarity, and this is what they actually did when they were bringing their own loyal people, because they wanted to see the familiar faces rather than the unfamiliar thing. Such same rule they applied on the language as well. Consonants. Old English consonants, this consonant th and the, representing th and the, there was just one consonant that represented both the things, whereas later on we had two consonant. The first one, this one is th, and the other one is the. Th and the. And then what happened, actually this the sound, it soon died out, and in Old English it was just that. Middle English it became that throughout period it was regarded that, and then this thing th began to resemble y. It started resembling j. For example, g is equal to jo, and g is equal to the. It started representing the sound, and this was the sound is this sound. This is the. This is tha. For example, in theft, and the other is, this is the. For example, the. You can remember it this way. G old coffee shop. This is not G, it was the old coffee shop. Ye it for that, for the at that. It was used later on. Some Old English consonants replaced with the W by 1300 at the latest, when v sound, with the v. It's W, this W is pronounced as v, as in watch. You would see it's v. It's labiodental, where the lips and the teeth are involved, and you pronounced it. It's not v. That v is something else. This is v. That was not like v. It is v. It is different, and that v is fricative. This is something else. Okay, the C problem. The C referring to two different things. This was once again a big problem. Old English C was equal to k, and then sometimes equal to ch as well, and then k as well, and C, G is equal to j sound as well. Whereas in French, s is equal to, C is equal to S, okay, place is equal to place, and it was introduced by the Normans, spread to native words sometimes. There were some other problems and the solutions of the C, and C when it was used for the s, as in the French, in some words it was like, for example, place and nice. Place and nice, when it would be used here, it would be pronounced as s, and it was same as it was used in French. When C was pronounced as k, and it was before back vowel remained. For example, in cumin, Middle English come up. C for k was pronounced before the front vowel replaced by the k. For Old English, it's in Old English it is sapen, and in it's kapen. By Middle English it's kapen. In Old English it is sapen, and in Middle English it is kapen. The modern English it's and in modern English it is keep, and it started basically from sipen in Old English. Then in Middle English, as you see, sipen in the Old English, kip in the Middle English, and then keep in the modern English. CN confusing because of his minims. Short stalks used to make both CN and replaced by can, still pronounced as, for example, in Old English it was pronounced as knit, knit, whereas in Middle English it was pronounced as knisht, knisht, k, ni, sh, t. It's knisht. Okay, for ch sound, normals introduced as seep in Old English period. It is seep in Middle English periods. It's cheap, and in Old English periods is sin. In Middle English period is chin. For sir in Old English periods is camu. In Middle English period is shame. It's sir sound here. It is a sa sound here. It is a sh sound here. Sh, s is also used as in Middle English. For example, shell, skull, cell. These were the different words that were used in the Old English and then Middle English. You have seen the differences in Old English and Middle English period. There were some other Norman spelling innovations as well. For j sound, this is that is written is j. They introduced double G in the spellings, and then they introduced DG and then E. And all, for example, in Old English there was a word that was brick. And on the towards the end we see G, ja sound, g, it's a brig. And then in Middle English it became brig, again with the E silent. Later in the Middle English period it became bridge. Yes, you see in the later English period it became bridge. Look at the oldest form of the bridge. Perhaps you can never realize and understand this. This is brig, and bridge. Okay, CW was replaced by Q. For example, in queen, sween, it was firstly pronounced as sween, and in Middle English it became queen, and in Modern English it is again queen. In Old English period, there is another word that is this one. This one is pronounced as jog. It was replaced by g sound in some cases. J for g, for example, in Old English, yeah, it was genre, whereas it is gerane in in Middle English, and it is green, and then in Modern English it is green. Yes, good to know that green is coming from green, and then green. Then in DG combination they have returned for a few of the words. For example, in Middle English period there was thought, and then in Modern English it became thought. There are some words. It is Gelden in Old English. It is Gelden in Modern English. Sorry, Middle English, and late Middle English it is Gelden. Gel to gel. Sometimes confused with the z and used for z. Middle English days. Yes, sometimes we get confused with the z sound and it converts into days. It's A's. Then we'll look at some Norman innovations. Norman innovations that we have already been looking at. It is a continuation of the same thing. Z for z sound, it's used irregularly in Middle English period. For example, as we have said, in Middle English it is stones, and then it was stonus before this. G for X sound. In Old English it was thought, thogged, and then thought. The emphasis in Middle English on G sound, thogged, and this is thought. Old English it is right, right, her sound is there, right, whereas in Middle English it is right. V sound for aspirated v, aspirated where you breath in, v. Old English used have. In Old English, hout, her, thumbs, and wait, a sound. This is her, this is v, a, and t. Have it. And Middle English it makes what. Old English it makes will, whereas in Middle English it makes it while. By analogy with the th, sh, and ch, there were some other normal innovations, also Northern and Scots spellings for q, quet, and qhet. It has also been changed. There were some other Norman innovations, starting with the gu, and it was for actually used for g sound. Originally only in English loan words. It started with the guard, goil, and guide. Then spread it to the native words. From Old English it was gallet, and whereas in Middle English it was guilt. V sound for v, in Old English it was siophon, and in Middle English it was seven. There were some French loans, very and vain. For example, ju and v sound both used for the vowels and the consonants. Later in the Middle English, v at the beginning of the word, ju in the middle of the word. For example, vendor and girl survives into early modern English period. E sound and j sound both used for the vowels and the consonants in the Middle English period. For example, this is, look at this word, team, time. In modern English this is time. Yug, jug, and this is, in modern English, this is judge. There are some Middle English vowels as well that we are going to look at today. A, this is the first vowel that is in butterfly form. It's a, it's disappeared, and it was replaced by a. For example, in what, it was this a sound, this you see, it was replaced with a. What? A. Then a. Stat, its a sound was replaced by e. Straight, stret. Then y sound or the front vowel in Old English period was spelled y. Then the late Old English period, unrounded in some dialects, became l or l. And then today y is a vowel only at the end of a word. For example, we don't have this vowel at the early stage in modern English. By, joy, party. In Greek loans it was system, lyre, dysentery. You can see that y is coming not at the end but rather after the first consonant. In a few monosyllables as well it comes die, rie, lie, etc. Yes, with this we have looked a lot on the orthography as well as the morphology of the words, and with this we come towards the end of the lecture. We started, let me give you a quick recapitulation of the whole lecture. We started our lecture with once again a bit of recapitulation to the Middle English period, our introduction to that, and we had seen that how the things have already taken place, and we looked at the things from the English perspective. And then we moved on to looking at the Middle English orthography as well as morphology. We have looked at so many constructions. We have traces the changes in not only in the spellings, in the words, but also in many of the things. Then in Middle English period, we have looked differently at the consonants, at the vowels, how they have changed, which vowel has been replaced with this thing, and we come to the conclusion that this is not an entire change. The change has taken place with the passage of time and over the centuries. And this was the end of today's lecture. Wait till the next lecture, and I hope that you enjoyed today, and hope to see you back in the upcoming lecture. Till then, Take good care of yourself and Allah Hafiz.